The days of wine and roses, laugh and run away like a child at play through the meadowland toward an open door, a door marked nevermore that wasn't there before. The lonely night discloses just a passing breeze filled with memories of the golden smile that seemed to lead me to the days of wine and roses and you.
Very nice.
Ooh, well done.
Quite something.
Thank you, Barry, for providing us with this song. Now I'm very pleased to introduce my friend and our speaker tonight, Julian. Julian has over 20 years of experience in 3 different countries as a Scrum Master, electronics engineer, and QA analyst in both firmware and hardware development, entrance control applications, video games, fintech, and 3D media and entertainment software. He enjoys learning about different industries and domains and using those lessons in his own work. When we worked together at TD, Julian often shared his learnings about Agile and teamwork with our Agile COE, and hence why he's here tonight. It's going to be a really great talk tonight about building high-performance teams. So very excited about that. Welcome, Julian, and now over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, everyone, for attending today. So why don't we just get started with this? I'm going to share this little intro about what we'll be talking about today. So I decided to make this presentation a few years ago because I usually when people talk about high performance teams, they talk about hypothetical teams in hypothetical situations, or they say they are real teams, but the claims about them are impossible to corroborate. And that just doesn't work for me. So instead, today, let's talk about teams whose records, achievements, and failures have all been well documented. And since I don't like talking about software development, instead, let's talk about this. Okay. So as you saw in that intro, in that short intro, Phil Jackson won 11 championships as coach of the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers. Phil arrived in Chicago in 1987 as an assistant coach under Doug Collins. At that time, the Bulls were a young and up-and-coming team led by superstar Michael Jordan and a core group of young and talented players, but they have been unable to get past the Detroit Pistons to reach the NBA Finals. They basically had 3 issues. They didn't have a system or framework of collaboration. Their approach was fairly improvisational, with the coach designing a series of plays that he would constantly change. Second, most of the plays were designed for Michael Jordan to score, and the coach will call the plays from the sidelines during the games. So the players were always paying attention to him, and this created an overdependence on the leaders. And finally, because the plays were designed for Jordan, it turned all the other players into bystanders who were not actively. From 87 to 89, the Bulls didn't post very impressive records during the regular season, as you can see there, and they were eliminated by Detroit in 88 and 89. Feeling that the team was not making enough progress, the general manager decided to fire the coach and promoted Phil Jackson as head coach for the 89 and 1990 season. The first item that Coach Jackson wanted to address was the lack of a framework, and he settled on the triangle offense. I'm not going to bore you with the technicalities of the triangle offense, but let's look at its principles. The triangle is an equal opportunity system that gives every player a vital role. That means accountability. This is what we expect from an agile team. Everyone contributes and they all have an important role within the team. Second, it requires the players to be aware of what's happening and be coordinated. That's one of the reasons we have daily stand-ups. And third, the coach no longer has full control of the team. Instead, the players must read the defense and make decisions on their own. That means autonomy. Now, that all sounds very good, but Phil still needed to convince Michael Jordan to share the ball. Having Michael Jordan in your team is like having a lead or a manager embedded in your Agile team, which usually happens. The amount of influence they exert over everyone else cannot be underestimated, and Phil knew that for this framework to work, he couldn't fight Michael. He needed to sell him on the principles behind the framework. He told him, Michael, you need to share the ball with your teammates, to which Michael replied, I don't trust them. So Phil said, if you don't share the spotlight with them, they won't learn, they won't grow, and you won't win. The second item that Phil wanted to address was the team's mentality. The Bulls had been a one-man show since the arrival of Michael Jordan, and the previous coach had only cemented that identity. Phil, on the other hand, wanted to evolve the team's mentality. There are 5 stages in tribal leadership. The first one is characterized by despair, hostility, and the collective belief that life sucks. This is common in street gangs. The second one is filled primarily with apathetic people who perceive themselves as victims and who are passively antagonistic with the mindset that my life sucks. Stage 3 is focused primarily on individual achievement and driven by the motto, I'm great and you're not. The result is a collection of lone warriors. And when you have a brand new team, this is probably how it starts. Stage 4 is dedicated to tribal pride and the overriding conviction that we're great and they're not. The bigger the foe, the more powerful the tribe. Stage 5 is a rare stage characterized by a sense of innocent wonder and the strong belief that life is great. The only time Coach Jackson felt one of his teams achieved this state was during the 95-90 season with the Bulls. So with the team transitioning from a stage 3 to a stage 4 mindset, the Bulls posted their best regular season record in nearly 20 years, but lost once again in the playoffs to the Detroit Pistons. This time, however, they had pushed them to the limit and went into the summer believing that if they played the right way, they could beat this team. So the next season, with the framework and mindset in place, the Bulls posted their best regular season record in franchise history and finally beat Detroit to reach and win the NBA Finals. This was followed by 2 more championships in 92 and 93 to put together their first three-peat, something that no team had accomplished in the NBA since the 1960s. But so far, I've only been talking about frameworks and mentality. What about the people that have to execute this? Because make no mistake, if you do not have the right people, you will never become an elite high-performance team. Here we have the rosters from 98 to 93. And if there is something to appreciate here, is how consistent the starting lineup of the Bulls was. This is something that we insist on when working with Agile teams. And what you can see here is that they only changed basically 2 players in those years. The chemistry of a team can be very fragile. And if you're constantly playing musical chairs with the roster of the team, their performance will be inevitably impacted. The Bulls seem to have everything going for them, but then Jordan decided to retire. Now, it's probably not fair to judge the Bulls, the framework they used, or the team's mentality, because with Jordan's retirement, they did lose the best player in the world. And if you're the best player in the world, there is no actual replacement for you. In 94, the Bulls actually didn't do as bad as everyone thought. They only lost 2 games less than the previous year with Jordan in the lineup. But when the true test came in the playoff, they were eliminated by New York in the second round. In 95, however, Jordan returned and put the Bulls back in championship contention. You will notice here 2 further changes to the starting lineup. Horace Grant signed with Orlando and was replaced by Tony Kukoc, and Bill Cartwright retired and was replaced by Luke Longley. Now, neither of those 2 players that were replaced had remarkable careers. They're not Hall of Famers or perennial All-Stars. They were solid players who, in theory, should have been easily replaced. When I asked the audience in my live presentation how they thought the Bulls fared in 95, most people thought they had reached or won the NBA Finals with Jordan back in the lineup. In reality, they were eliminated again in the second round, this time by Orlando. And while it is true that Michael Jordan had been away from the game for too long, the real issue was that they had lost their best rebounder and low post defender in Horace Grant, and they had replaced him with somebody who was not fulfilling that role. And the point here is that when you replace people on a team, you're not replacing bodies. You should be looking to replace their contributions. So the Bulls management went into the offseason with one question in mind. Who is the best rebounder and in the league? It was this guy. Now, today, People are much more open to an individual expressing their personality and being their true self at work. But back in 1995, Rodman was a real question mark in many people's minds, but not on Phil Jackson's, who was never concerned with Rodman's eccentricities. He was only concerned about whether he would mesh well with the team and do the job that he had to do. He interviewed Dennis twice and decided to bring him in. He also talked to the players and warned them that Rodman was probably going to ignore some of the team rules because it was hard for him to abide by certain guidelines, and he would probably have to make some exceptions for him. And the lesson here is that frameworks are not one size fits all. And in large organizations, you will find all kinds of people. So be willing to adjust so you can meet people where they are instead of expecting them to be somewhere else. Work with them, find a common ground. Of course, their contributions to the success of the team must offset the distractions and potential impact to the team chemistry. Otherwise, there is no point. But you should at least make an effort to approach these situations with an open mind. So with all the pieces back in place, the Bulls again won 3 consecutive championships and on their way posted what was at the time the best regular season record in NBA history with 72 wins in 95 and 96. The lineup that you see here was consistent throughout the 3 championships. So far, we've spoken about what Phil did right and the success that he achieved in Chicago, but we can also learn from his failures, just as we can learn from our own. Throughout his years in Chicago, Phil's relationship with Jerry Krause, the general manager of the Bulls, deteriorated to the point that before the start of his last season there, the general manager told him, "I don't care if you have a perfect record. This is your last year." Part of the problem was that in an effort to shield the team from outside distractions and mold their mind into a we're great and they're not mentality, Phil had antagonized management and the situation had turned into a power struggle. And even though Phil was offered the opportunity to return for 1 more year, he decided to leave. Jordan said he didn't want to play for a different coach and retire again. And Pippen and several supporting cast members hit free agency and left for other teams. This situation, unfortunately, happens sometimes with agile teams, because in an effort to shield the team from outside distractions, Scrum Masters fail to build a good working relationship with managers and other stakeholders. But like any other relationship, there are 2 sides to this story, and Jerry Krause was adamant to prove that he could rebuild the Bulls into a championship team without Jackson and Jordan. In my live presentation, I asked the audience how many championships they thought the Bulls had won over the last 23 years after Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan left the organization. There were several answers given, but the correct one is 0. 0 championships in 23 years. And even if you cut them some slack and ask how many NBA final appearances they had, the answer is also 0. A true elite high-performance team requires the right talent, framework, mentality, leadership, and unity of purpose. And the union of all those elements is extremely fragile. It's difficult to put together and maintain. Jerry Krause, like many other general managers in sports, have had to learn this the hard way. Use what you have learned. I'm not saying use what you have used. That's what everybody does. I'm saying use what you have learned, which may include not doing some things anymore. To do this, you need to take time to reflect on what you did and how it turned out. So after taking a year off from coaching, Phil joined the Lakers, and using what he had learned, he led them to 7 NBA final appearances and 5 championships. His approach, in the words of one of his players, which is something that I use today, consisted in 3 steps in this order. The first one was to sit back and let the characters reveal themselves. You have to take time to understand the situation that you're walking into. Number 2 was to nurture the team, spend more time with each member. Usually this means spending more time with those members who are farther away from the mindset that you're trying to forge. And number 3 was take a more assertive role. Most managers, coaches, scrum masters jump straight to this point by passing the first 2. In Phil's opinion, this should be your last step. Finally, to close this out, I would like to share a quote with you from Phil. What I've learned over the years is that the most effective approach is to delegate authority as much as possible and to nurture everyone else's leadership skills as well. Leadership is not about forcing your will on others. It's about mastering the art of letting go. That's it for me. Thank you very much for your time. I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to talk to you about this, and I hope you enjoyed it and got something good out of it.
Thanks so much, Julian. Enjoyed that. Yeah, I've got a few questions that people have thrown to me in the chat. I guess a couple of people are struggling to draw parallels between the sports example that you've got and our day-to-day in a corporate environment, and just kind of connecting the dots between the uh, a few different aspects of the sports uh, uh, situation, and one in particular that stood out for me that was raised was the delivery. So a sports team in effect is delivering when they're in their games, and so it's a small percentage of the overall time that they spend together. The rest of the time they have to practice and get hone their skills. That'd be like our teams having 3/4 of their time devoted to training and practice and so forth, as opposed to actual delivery. Whereas, as we know, the pressure to deliver and the amount of time they have to deliver is the vast proportion of their time. And so, just wanted to get your insight into how that distinction could be sort of reconciled, and how we would sort of draw the parallels with a sports franchise for the teams that we're working with day to day.
So I purposely didn't focus the presentation on that aspect, on how they do their work versus how a person in a corporate environment would, let's say, develop software, because it is quite different. And on top of that, they deal with an enormous amount of exterior pressure that we will never experience in our jobs. The fans, the press, the team, the social media is something that we will never have to deal with. I chose to focus instead of you're dealing with human interactions within an organization that is expected to deliver results. And in order to be successful at achieving those results, you have to hit certain marks, like having the appropriate framework for your team and your context, having forging a team mentality within the group of that people, because when you started, they're literally just a group of people, and also you have to have the right leadership to support that vision and the right goal or unity of purpose.
Okay, thank you. Sort of a follow-on question. I got from your presentation the importance of the team as a whole and delegating responsibility and so forth. There still seemed to be a lot of focus on what I'll loosely describe as the superstars, and that's something that is, I think, challenging in the context of the teams that we're working with. So how do we deal with those? I mean, we used to call them cowboys in the software development context, the people that are, those guys that think a lot of themselves and expect everybody else to as well, that can be toxic in an agile context. How do you deal with that superstar mentality?
Yeah. So there is two things to that, I think. Number one is that, I mean, it's absolutely true that not everyone in the team is going to have the same personality or the same level of experience or the same approach to the work that they do. So you will have people almost inevitably that will be more outspoken, that will be, will try to lead the way, etc. And the way Phil tried to address that problem in Chicago and then in Los Angeles was to make them understand that they do need the others. I was recently in a retrospective session where somebody says, I don't care about what everybody else does. And do I have to fake care that, And my point was, what I told him was, can you do this by yourself? And obviously not. You do need these other people. So you do need to care, because in order to deliver this work, we are going to need everyone's contributions here. That may not work with everyone, because some people might react to that differently. But the other way I did it one time In another team where I had a very senior developer and a group of very young developers was we were trying to do some estimation on the work that we had, and I opened the session saying, okay, I really want to hear from everybody because this one person is not going to do all the work, and he's been here forever. So his assessment of the work and what it'll take him to do it is very different from everybody else's. So I really want to hear from everybody. And we got to a point where he kind of naturally stepped back and allowed the others to voice their opinion first before he would say anything, so that he could get also an idea of what they were thinking, what challenges they were seeing. And it worked out for us.
Are there any specific lessons or I'll call them stories that you would take to leaders in organizations that we might be working with that come from this example of a very successful coach in a sports franchise? So what is it that's going to be compelling that might change behaviors that are counterproductive for the folks who are leading organizations?
For me, probably the biggest lesson that I got out of here was that if you want to call all of the shots, if you want to direct the team in every possible way, and I have worked with people who are like that. I worked with people who didn't even allow the people that they managed to comment on tickets or to reassign them, for example, which I think is ludicrous, but to that extent. The others will not learn, and they will not grow. They will not take responsibility for their work. They will not take accountability for what they do, or ownership, which is another word that is used often. And a leader really must understand that if they want that team to be successful and to really take that next step to become extremely successful, they need to nurture the ability on people to own the decisions, own the problems. Many times, and this is something that Phil Jackson used to do, the team would be struggling in a game and he would not call a timeout. He would allow them to, he said it basically in the book. He said it, they got themselves in this situation, they have to get themselves out. And obviously, there are situations in which that doesn't happen. He talks about that in one book. He says, we were, game 7 in the finals, we were falling behind. We didn't have time for them to figure it out because we're going to just lose the championship here. So he stepped in and he told them what to do. And that goes with sometimes that you hear often in the Agile community, you hear that, you're not supposed to tell the team what to do. Well, the truth is that there are different leadership styles. And sometimes you do have to adjust and adapt. And sometimes it is okay to get the team out of a jam because there's not enough time to solve this or to let them figure it out on their own. So you have to adjust to those situations.
Great, thank you. So
I guess you have a question here from Yvonne.
Oh, I think you answered it. I think you mostly answered it when I think Tom was asking as I was typing. So
yeah, we're clearly synchronized somehow.
Oh, that's really funny.
Yeah, I guess I like, Julian, what you alluded to in terms of allowing the team to fail. I think that is an important principle that was modeled there, but is one that those of us in Agile teams are pretty familiar with. I'm a little baffled though by the this notion that you just described, that sometimes you do have to wade in and tell them what to do or solve the problem for them. I struggle with that, because as soon as you go down that road, then it sets a precedent that invites the team to defer decisions. And so maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what kind of situations would arise where that would be an appropriate response.
So for example, and this is, Yvonne, you always help us when that happens. So there are situations when we're close to a release date, and there are and last minute issues come up. They're just, you have a commitment to that date basically, and there is an entire set of operations and things that have to happen for you to be able to deliver. There isn't sufficient time to go back to each team and have a huddle or whatever you want to call it to figure out what the best solution is. And that's when sometimes a person has to step up and say, listen, this is what we should do. This is the pros and cons or whatever. Let's make a decision now. And in those situations, I think it's appropriate to, make a decision for the team instead of allowing them, to fail or give them time to figure it out, because there isn't any. But in the normal flow of work, I think you need to let them figure it out. Another thing that I let them figure out is when there is internal conflict in the team, there are things that you can do. I sometimes reach out to them, to team members individually, but I need them to, I need to give them time to figure out how to work with one another, instead of all the time being, they're telling them how to behave.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Mara had an observation.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. What struck me, Julian, I picked up on the word when Michael Jordan said he doesn't trust them.
Yeah.
And so I found that quite interesting in it. And there's a lot of work on trust, a lot of different thought leaders around trust that I'm familiar with. But teams don't want to spend time on trust, or leaders don't want to spend time on trust. It feels too ooey gooey, but I feel like to take that learning and try to get that cowboy to trust the team, it's more than just explaining why it's useful. I think there's some trust work that needs to be done. And can you comment on that?
Well, I think the other thing that reinforces that, the fact that they need to trust the rest of the members of the team, or that person needs to trust the others, is that usually the framework helps with that. Because when the framework, you establish a way of working in which all the other contributions are equally important. There was one team that I had, I think it was last year or the year before, where the dev lead, who is, let's say, the Jordan of the team, he only wanted to track work that was merged, so resolved, but not tested. And I told him, no way. Like, our work is not completed until we make sure that it works, that it meets whatever requirements your team may have. So the contributions of the QA members of the team are just as important as everybody else's to guarantee that work actually functions. So there is that element that the framework helps you with when you're trying to build trust, because then you'll see that the other people's contributions are as important. But there is also that other element that is more human, that I think is what you're talking about. And what I usually do is I try to identify, from my feeling, from my interactions with the team daily or so forth, from the retrospectives, I try to interpret some of the glaring issues that they have. And I try to find an example such as this, or something different, a talk maybe, or a video that I found that addresses that subject, but not necessarily in the context that we have. And then I show them that, I open my retrospective with that. So one that I chose for an upcoming retrospective is the importance of saying no, for example, which is something that teams sometimes struggle with. So you can try to, you obviously are not going to spend a lot of time building trust in the team. I think that will happen slowly, but you can use retrospective sessions and other forums like that to help them build on those things that you see they're lacking.
Well, I guess I was thinking maybe as Lencioni's, behaviors of an effective team, and trust being at the bottom, I think, if I remember correctly. And that's a framework as well. And having constructive conflict so you can commit together. Maybe that's an idea. You could use that as a framework too. Maybe retrospective is a great place to call that out if you're seeing trust issues as a root of something else. Anyway, thank you.
And we have a question here also on the chat. What comes first, purpose or the team? I actually believe it's a team because the goal, the purpose is basically the goal. In teams, in sports teams, is to to win the championship or whatever. But you're never going to achieve that unless you build all the other foundations and put them in place. Unless you have the right people, unless you have the right framework, unless you have the right leadership that supports that. Then you can achieve that goal. There is the general manager, the owner, and general manager, president, and general manager of the Dallas Cowboys. Fired his coach after winning 2 consecutive Super Bowls. Or basically, they fell out. And he said, anybody can win with this team. And the next year, they didn't win. The year after, they did get another good coach that was able to win with the team that the other guy had left behind. But ever since the 90s, they haven't won anything. Nothing. Because putting those pieces together is extremely difficult, especially at that, at that level. So absolutely, the people, the team, are the thing that you have to focus on if you want to win.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if you have come across Jack Hackman, Collaborative Intelligence. He's a CIA guy. Yeah, actually, I borrowed this thing from I think it's probably a framework. So what he said is create a real team. That is the first step you take. So he has worked with hundreds of teams in the CIA agency, and yeah, so that was the first thing he said. And I've seen this thing and have these discussions. The people I work with, like, when we create a team, let's not destroy the team.
Yeah.
Keep the team, maybe give them other work. Do not destroy the team when there is no work for the team.
Yeah.
The scope or the goal can change. And I was reading something, Peopleware, I think it's a pretty old book. I think it in the book it says that the purpose of the team is not goal attainment, but goal alignment. And this bring actually back into the corporate, I think what Tom was earlier asking, so we need to have an alignment of goal, and that is what the teams are for. But yeah, thanks for your thoughts. Yeah.
So Barry just threw a very long question into the chat.
So, strong link sport or weakness. Basketball is strong link sport since the person dominated the play. Okay, so I think in the context of an agile team, which is usually a relatively small team, I think I would think is a strong link sport. Interactions is much smaller. I haven't had a team past 9 people in a long time, and I think those interdependencies, or let's say the need of one another, is bigger when the team is smaller. That's what I would say.
Oh, that's interesting. Thanks. I hadn't really thought about the size of the team, so it's.
Yeah, but it's a good point. Like in soccer, we have 11 players on the pitch. It's much more difficult with somebody to dominate completely. It's rare, actually.
Yeah.
Although some of those players seem to get paid an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
I had one thing that stuck with me from the very beginning of your talk. You said that you don't like to talk about software development. It's kind of an interesting perspective for somebody who's an agile practitioner in the world. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So when I first became a Scrum Master Karen was my first manager when I became a Scrum Master. I was new to the team, I was new to the role, and I was new to the project where I had been assigned to work. And when I came in, I noticed, well, it was a challenging project. There were a lot of challenges all around. And
Wait, at
I knew that if
surely not.
and I mean, there were some people from our team that had been there for, I guess, for months by the time I arrived. And I knew if I wanted to say something of what I had noticed, I couldn't talk about the project. I needed to find a way around that to talk about what I had seen that was hurting us in a way that, you know, would help the message. So I decided to speak about something entirely different. And that first presentation was about collaboration. I remember Karen was there, and it was about collaboration in big budget films and franchises. That was where I started, because we had lost, we basically had become another obstacle for the team to overcome, instead of being there to help them achieve their goals.
Got it. Thank you.
Julian, thanks so much for your beautiful presentation. Now, one thing I kind of like in your presentation is the fact that you actually draw parallels from other areas apart from the core work itself. And in a way, I think that helps to make people to relax and to actually connect the dots.
Yeah.
As against, we're talking about the same work we do every day, and we may not be able to see our blind spots. However, a question I have is, in your opinion, do you think it was okay for Phil Jackson to have left the Bulls at that time? And secondly,
sorry, I didn't get that last part.
Do you think it was okay, it was all right for him to have left the Bulls at that time due to challenges with leadership? And if you were to be in that situation, what would you have done differently? Because you had built a team to that point, and if you had won 3 championships, it's possible that you would have still won the next 5 or 6 more championships with such a high-performing team. But leaving the team at that point because of challenges with leadership may also be a letdown on the team itself that you had built. But then what do you think you would have done differently to have continued with that momentum, with the momentum that he had with the same leadership?
So I think the biggest destroyer of teams is egos. And I think in that relationship, that was what destroyed the team. The ego of the general manager, the ego that Phil has, the ego that Michael had in saying, I'm not going to play for any other coach. So they all kind of just let it fall apart. And I don't know if that, I mean, he didn't speak about regretting that decision. I've never actually, I've watched him in interviews and documentaries and everything, and I don't think he regretted it. I think they got to a point where it was an unsustainable situation. If I were in that position where I had a team like that and had to decide between, you know, my ego and the team, today I think I can happily say that I would choose the team. And the reason for that happened again in one of my earlier projects, when we were having some, again, extremely difficult, challenging project, and I was new to all of that. And I remember I reacted poorly in one of the sessions. I felt personally attacked, and I reacted poorly to the situation. And later, taking some time to, you know, I took some time to reflect on that, and I realized what I'm doing here as a Scrum Master, at least in that role, has nothing to do, it's not about me. Nothing, my role is not here because this is what I want the team to do, or this is what I want them to talk to one another, or how many times they should meet in a week, or for how long, or, you know, I realized very early on that the purpose of the team and the team itself is what matters the most to me. And I need to let my ego outside every time I walk into one of these sessions.
That's a very interesting perspective. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Julian. Really, really appreciate that. We will we'll call it a night. And so thanks again to Julian. Thanks to everybody for turning out, and have yourselves a great Wednesday evening.